like and subscribe. Now. Serious therapists. What is something people are afraid to tell you because they think it's weird, but that you've actually heard a lot of times before? Intrusive thoughts. Nearly everyone has thoughts about pushing the old lady onto the subway train, swerving into opposing traffic, or stabbing their loved one in the stomach while cooking dinner with them. Some folks, however, take these thoughts very serious that believe that they might act them out. It's called thought-action fusion. Most of us are able to brush them off, though. I have heard some variant of this is probably weird, but I feel if I am my true self around others then they won't like me more times than I can count. As I explore the formative situations to this belief alongside my clients, it definitely pulls at my heartstrings. The amount of people I see who feel like they should be grieving a certain way and are afraid that they must not have loved someone, or must not have cared. People grieve in all sorts of ways. The 5 stages of grief are bullshit. I was consulting with another clinician who was seeing a couple whose daughter had died. The wife was convinced that the husband must not have cared about her because he wasn't grieving out loud. In reality, while she had been going to support groups and outwardly expressing, he had been continuing to work in a garden that him and his daughter had kept when she was alive, using that time to process and grieve as he did. Both were perfectly fine ways of grieving. However, it is expected that one's grief is more than the other. They both ended up working it out, however. He driving her and others to their weekly support group. Her attempting to work in the garden with him on the condition that they didn't talk. Really sweet. To that same extent, the amount of people who are unaware of their own emotions and emotional process is astounding. So many people feel only angry or happy and worry something must be wrong with them otherwise. Normalizing feeling the whole gamut is just as important. Recognizing what we are feeling as well as what it feels like in our body when we are feeling is incredibly helpful for understanding how we process and feel as a whole. How we treat emotions as a society is kinda effed. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. My mom yelled at my once for not even caring when my dad left. I turned around, walked out of the house, and it has impacted our relationship to this day. In reality, I was doing my damnedest to hold everything together, as in helping with the household needs, supporting her and my sister, and doing a lot of internal work. Just because I'm not very expressive doesn't mean that I don't have feelings, or that I'm not processing. I'd say a common one is believing that there's something innately, irreparably wrong with them that makes them unable to ever truly fit in. For a lot of people it's such a deeply ingrained belief that it can be extremely painful to acknowledge or express, regardless of the level of personal success in their lives. The worst is knowing beyond doubt that you are holding a false belief about yourself and yet not being able to change it. I've spent long enough in therapy trying to figure out what's wrong with me to know there's no there, but the ingrained pattern of thinking doesn't go away. 2 topics come up with regularity: when someone discloses to me that they were sexually abused as a kid, and or when someone is experiencing suicidal ideation. Both are something I hear from clients every single day, and so I don't find it weird at all. But when I have someone in front of me who's talking about it for the first time, I know it's important to validate the fact that even though I might be talking about this for like the 5th time that day, they have never talked about this ever, and are in need of gentle care to feel safe. Yes, that validation was life-changing for me. I talked about my early childhood sexual trauma to a few people and counselors to try to process, and was often told that what I went through wasn't that bad or someone else had it worse. It wasn't until a few years ago that our marriage counselor validated my feelings in front of my husband that I truly felt heard and was able to start healing. That they do not know what they enjoy doing. Often they have people in their life, including therapists, say try to do something fun today or ask what do you like to do when you have free time. Many people I work with do not know what those are. Once I explain that I dislike these statements questions because they assume people should know the answer, and that many people don't, I can watch as they relax, take a deep breath, and say something to the effect of, "Oh my, that's so good to hear. I have no idea what I like to do." That's part of the problem. More often than not they feel like they should know and that everyone else their age has it figured out. They are embarrassed to say that they don't know when in fact not knowing is very common. I couldn't even try to count how many clients I've had this conversation with. A common one in the time I was a therapist was simply "I don't know." You'd be surprised how reluctant people are to admit that they don't know why they're feeling how they are. But that's exactly why I'm not a therapist anymore, sat there with me, so we can figure out why together. It always put me in mind of a line from America by Simon and Garfunkel. Kathy, I'm lost, I said, though I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching and I don't know why. That Simon and Garfunkel line is one of my favorites ever. It's so full of emotion. It's beautiful and sad. Unwanted intrusive thoughts are normal and do not mean you are a bad person. Yes, even intrusions of sexual, religious, moral themes, by definition. These are thoughts that are unwanted BC. They go against your own values and highlight what you don't want to do. Egg. A religious person having unwanted blasphemous images pop into their mind. Or a new parent having unwanted sexual thoughts about their new baby. However normal these thoughts are, over 90% of the population. The moral nature of these thoughts mean that often people experience a lot of shame and take many years before they first tell someone about them. With my last baby, I would suddenly think to myself, what if I just drop her on the floor? Was horrified for a bit before I realized it was normal. So every time I would think about something like that, I would complete the thought. What if I drop the baby? Baby could die. I would go to jail. That would really suck. Let's not drop the baby. Eater, I didn't think this comment would be seen by many. It was a quickly written response. In order of importance, the first thing that would be horribly wrong with dropping my child is that she could die. That would be the worst. But then there is also the possibility of jail, which was why it was second. So for everyone thinking that my biggest concern is jail, it's not. Someone I know had some of these thoughts and it freaked her out. She told someone at a postpartum group and the woman leading her took her over to the hospital and had her admitted for psychiatric watch. She didn't say nor did she have any desire to do those actions. She just visualized it and it frightened her, and neither the postpartum group nor the hospital knew how to deal with it. They kept her for 3 days before transferring her to a facility where it took another 2 days to finally see someone who was qualified to talk about mental health, and they were somewhat appalled by the whole scenario. They just told her that she needed to get some uninterrupted sleep and maybe to see a therapist to help her talk through things. It was incredibly hard and frustrating. It took quite a few more years to actually get over the trauma of being admitted when trying to seek help, and I'm not sure she has really gotten over it. Another great example for this from my experience is that I'm a late 20s male teacher and spent a couple years substituting at the high school level until settling down in a middle school. In the beginning, it was absolutely horrifying to me that there were some students who were undeniably sexually attractive. I thought I was a monster and hadn't realized it until now, but my therapist just asked, well, if you had the chance to have sex with any of them knowing it was consensual and you'd never get caught, would you do it? Then before I could answer, he said, don't even worry about answering that out loud. Just ask it to yourself. If the answer is yes, we should talk about this topic more. If the answer is no, then you are absolutely 100% normal. Basically, he explained to me that it was a textbook intrusive thought because I could become sexually aroused by their appearance, but at the same time absolutely disgusted when even imagining actually engaging. He said it's important to be honest with myself and make sure my answer would be the same if it were a 0% chance I'd ever get caught and the other party was consensually enjoying it, i.e. not RE. Still to this day that helped me a lot because I have not even a sliver of doubt that I would never in a million years follow through with that arousal. But a junior or senior in yoga pants and a crop top can still potentially lead to natural arousal. Thank you for writing this. I have struggled a lot with similar thoughts that I've felt too much shame to even think about, and it made me feel better when I realized that my answer to the equivalent question also would be no. Psychologist here. Basically, anything having to do with sex, there's so much shame. Sexual abuse, sexual fantasies and fetishes, erectile dysfunction, infidelity, becoming sexually assertive. I've been told that I have a good psychologist's face. I try not to have a strong reaction to normalize the discussion. With adolescents, they are extremely anxious to tell me if they've relapsed or aren't doing well. They cut one night or they were suicidal. They're having a lot of negative self-talk or panic attacks. They'll come in pretending everything is okay. It's usually in the last 10-15 minutes that they'll say something. They'll reveal that they worried they'd let me down, that I'd be disappointed in them, It usually turns into a discussion about policing other people's feelings and tolerating emotions. I explain that I care about their well-being and it's my job to monitor my emotions and reactions, not their role. Those last 15 minutes of a session are when I spew out all the best stuff to my therapist, and then I feel a negative emotion that I brought it up at the end and can't finish talking about it. I always feel like I've wasted her time, or I'm taking up too much time space because I've always got so much to say and I always go over by like 5 minutes. That they don't like their family members, are angry, want to stop communication with their parents, etc. I work in a country which is more culturally collectivist, so not wanting anything to do with your parents makes you an a-hole in the current cultural sense. We deal with this almost on a daily basis. There is deep and profound shame in this, and when we find that line of it might be that your parents are toxic to your mental well-being, trigger your trauma. Many of my clients actually get visibly angry with me. Cultural psychology is so important, cause when I first moved here I had my American European hat on. Oh boy, did I need to adjust. Clients become quite fearful of admitting that they weren't successful since the last time they had a session. This could include not succeeding in using a coping skill that they're learning about, or not being able to complete a homework assignment I gave them. Humans aren't robots, and therapy is a lot of work. That being said, I don't expect people to be perfect as they start to work on themselves in a positive way. It takes time to really commit to change, especially in relation to trauma or conflicted views that an individual holds. I feel as if the client doesn't want to let me down as their therapist, but these failure events are just as important to talk about as successful moments. I had to learn this lesson as a client. I suffer with ADHD and struggled immensely with starting and completing my graduate work when I was getting my master's, to the point of sometimes making no progress and not completing any work and putting my student status in jeopardy. My therapist had an idea for me to text him at the end of each day to let him know what I had gotten done, as a way of holding myself accountable to someone else. However, I struggled to even do that, and after 2 days, stopped texting him because I still wasn't completing any work and was too embarrassed to tell him. When I came in for my session the following week, I very clearly looked embarrassed and couldn't properly look him in the eye. He said, "Dude, you're coming in here looking like you just killed someone or something. It's okay. You're going to make progress, and it's okay if you're not successful at first. It's all a part of learning to improve. You don't need to be scared or embarrassed if you don't succeed the first time. If you don't complete any work, just tell me. I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm here to encourage you and help you manage yourself better." It really helped to hear that because I put so much pressure on myself. Even though my ability to do things normally is compromised, I still see the same therapist. He's great and has helped me improve a lot since then. Women often feel really ashamed when they tell me they are burned out on being a parent or that they never want to have kids. I wish all of them knew how common this thought is. Some of the most common ones have been visual and or auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. I usually hear "I don't want to be put in the hospital" or "I don't want you to think I'm crazy." Also, basically anything sexual. I'm not going to judge you for being into BDSM, fetishes, etc. Honestly, I've probably heard it before and I'm not here to judge you. Same goes with any non-consensual experiences, especially if we're working through trauma. I've been terrified to talk to my therapist about how I have a panic attack whenever I am getting close to orgasm. Psychologist in the US, to name a few. Compulsive masturbation. Fears of being a pedophile rapist. This is a common OCD fear. Hoarding. Sexual performance difficulties. History of sexual abuse or sexual assault. Unfortunately, it is very common. Drug use. Amount of money spent on various things. Having an ASD diagnosis. Going back to an abusive relationship. Staying in an abusive relationship. Grieving years and years after a loss. Self-harm of all sorts. Wanting to abandon their current lifestyle. For example, to have more sex. To escape responsibility or expectations. History of gang violence, crime. Their sexuality or asexuality. Gender identity. The impact of racism, racial trauma. Paranoia. Hallucinations. Feeling uncomfortable in therapy. Not believing in therapy. Difficulty trusting a therapist. Fear of psychiatric medication. Fear of doctors in general. I was surprised to see suicidal ideation on others' responses. Most of my clients seem to talk very openly about suicidal thoughts and urges from the start of therapy, which I think is super healthy. I think that most of the people I've worked with had SI, current or history, as weird as it may seem. I can't imagine what a life without any thoughts about suicide would even look like. At this point, I don't recall a time a patient said something in therapy and I was shocked or even thought, oh, that's new. And emo. If you surprise your therapist, that is okay. I wonder if we asked Reddit, what are you afraid to tell anyone, even a therapist, because you think it is weird? How many people would see that they aren't that weird at all? I was seeing my therapist, who I think is great and was super comfortable with, for depression anxiety, and I still never told her about my suicidal thoughts because in my mind that would totally change things and it'd get serious. Truery, I had the same fear. I did eventually tell her BC I knew I was very on the edge, so it was like a last resource kinda thing. She did look surprised and very worried about me, and in the moment I felt super ashamed about it. I thought, oh this just got real. We talked about it. She even gave me her number, which made me feel even more ashamed. BC she was giving it to me in case something very bad would happen. But then I got home and felt good about telling her. It was a huge weight off my shoulders. And, as you can see, I'm still here. Hidden sexual dreams and fantasies about family members, more common than people think, and often stays that way and doesn't really interfere in the person's close relationships unless they allow it. Many things we dream or think are unconscious and involuntary, and the root of such things is often nonsensical. Many things we dream or think are unconscious and involuntary, and the root of such things is often nonsensical. This thread in its entirety had been very heartening, and this sentence in particular is immediately helpful and relevant to my experience. Thank you for expressing it so succinctly. Usually it's sex related. Shame about their desires or kinks is common. Gender questioning is another. Some people are ashamed of things they did in childhood or adolescence, haven't ever told anyone and think the team will be horrified. We have heard everything. I'm always compassionate and always understand why we do the things we do. I've yet to have anyone bring something I can't get. I do a lot of trauma work. Many people who have experienced molestation or sexual assault feel ashamed and confused because their bodies responded. Having an erection, lubrication or even an orgasm does not mean you wanted the sexual contact and it is still assault. Clients often hold a lot of shame and confusion about this. They wonder if it means they wanted it or if there is something wrong with them. It is a tough thing to work through because of this. Assault is assault. Sometimes human bodies respond to sexual touch even when we don't want that touch. Someone once said it's like tickling. You laugh when you get tickled even though you don't want someone to tickle you. OCD gets misunderstood a lot. It's not just having a clean house or liking things to be organized. Common intrusive thoughts can include violent thoughts of harming children and other loved ones, intrusive thoughts of molesting children, fear of being a serial killer, etc. My clients can feel a lot of shame when discussing the thoughts or worry I will hospitalize them. Mine was intrusive thoughts about bad things happening to my pets and children, and I would obsess over them. Then it became, if I don't say out loud that I'm thinking this bad thing could happen, like child choking on a cracker while with their grandparents, then it will definitely happen. That spiraled into checking and rechecking 7-8 times the freezer every time I opened it to make sure a child or cat hadn't gotten in there without me seeing somehow. Totally irrational. But my brain told me if I didn't check, it would have happened and been all my fault. Then the same thing started happening with the door and window locks, the dryer, the washer. Nothing was off limits with my brain. It was wild. I ended up working through it on my own by reading a lot of what helped other people, but it was totally out of control and took over my whole life at one point. I work with a lot of anxiety and trauma clients. Whenever I ask if they would describe their experience as being anxious about being anxious, I get a lot of OMG. Yes, anxiety has such a physical impact in the body. Heart pounding, trouble breathing, feeling faint or cold, tunnel vision, that we become aware of our body's reaction before we even notice the anxious thoughts triggering the reaction. Then we panic about why our bodies are flipping out when we're not even aware of feeling threatened, and the anxiety compounds on itself. Anxiety is like an alarm system in our bodies to signal the presence of, real or perceived, danger. What would you do if your alarm was going off at your house? Check to see if there's a real threat. Scan your environment situation to ground yourself in the present. Turn off the alarm. Breathing exercises do help, along with mindfulness techniques like body scans. And then investigate what tripped the alarm. Process thoughts around the situation that read like danger to you. It's also important to note that danger doesn't need to be a gun getting pulled on you. Panicking during a presentation that could impact your job and threaten the way you pay your bills and afford your life can feel pretty dangerous if you think about it. As someone in the substance abuse field, I know that it's difficult for clients to tell me they got high with a parent, but it's something I get told fairly regularly. It's kinda sad that they haven't had sex with their partner in years and don't know how if they will ever have sex with their partner again. There is so much shame around sex in the USA that a lot of people are scared to talk to their partner about their sexual needs. Time goes by, and suddenly they haven't had sex in 3, 5, 10 years. It starts for a lot of people in their 40s and 50s. A lot of people, falsely, believe there is something wrong with their marriage because they fantasize about people other than their partner. Recurring intrusive thoughts about harming others can be hurting, killing someone, or sexual fantasies about children or relatives. Usually people take a while to admit those. The reality is that if you are having them frequently, you aren't dangerous. You probably have OCD and are terrified that you might be dangerous. It was once explained to me that intrusive thoughts are often not things we're wanting to do, but our brain basically wants to bring it up and contemplate about something bad that could happen so it's ready to respond. I work in an older adult service for people with dementia and mental health problems. I see a lot of family members, carers, feeling ashamed of the fact that they are finding it incredibly difficult to care for someone that has dementia or a chronic mental health problem. Carer burnout is a real issue, and people need to know that it's not easy to see someone you love struggling every day, or slowly fading away month by month. Carers and family members desperately need time for themselves and need to know that it's okay to feel the way that they do. No one is superhuman and we all have our own needs. It's why we have therapy groups for carers. It's okay to struggle to look after someone, and you should in no way feel ashamed of having those feelings. 5 years into caring of my 100% disabled father, and can't agree more. I always been dubious about therapy and all that, but I know I need it. I'm burnt, mentally exhausted, desperate to have some time for myself. Finding time to socialize and maybe a good relationship looks so hard, and the only thing that makes me carry on is that I love him and he doesn't deserve to end his days in some elder's residence, something equivalent. He was there to raise me and support me for every stupid thing I wanted as a child, and NPW, it's time to give back. But damn, sometimes when I have to start the day feels like I'd throw me in a lake and F off everything. That they hear voices. I've found that a lot of people aren't familiar with their own internal dialogue or self-talk, and that this is typically normal internal processing. A lot of people think that they are hearing voices and hallucinating. There are some pretty simple questions we can ask to determine if it's hallucinating or just internal dialogue, and most often it's the latter. Could you share what some of these questions are? I'm support worker, social worker, not a therapist. I've had clients too scared to tell me their accomplishments because they think they should only be bringing their problems to case management, and that if we see them getting better that we won't care, prioritize them as much. Another is hard drugs. We don't endorse it by any means, but we have to know if we need to keep an eye out for inappropriate behavior and overdoses. We never get mad at them for being high. We just wanna send them to their room to sober up. Intrusive thoughts about sex with family members, or, in their mind, nymphomania as a result of childhood sexual trauma, and adult hypersexuality isn't often discussed as one of the PTSD symptoms, so people walk around with so much shame about it. I have intrusive thoughts about this stuff. I've had them since I was young, but I've never experienced sexual trauma, at least from what I can remember. On the flip side, I was afraid to tell my therapist about my suicidal fantasies. I was always told when you talk about suicide, people assume you're seeking some attention or special treatment, or that they lock you up in a psych ward. When I finally brought it up, I was told that's not true, and a lot of people fantasize about suicide. It is normal. I felt silly for thinking I was weird.